Let's imagine there's a potentially fake video of Donald Trump looking and speaking as though he's virulently ill. And there's a rumor that it's actually a piece of AI generated, manipulated media. Many individuals are grappling with this. Newspapers are deciding how they publish on this story. Media forensics experts at platform entities are trying to look for clues in the artifact to suggest if it's been manipulated. Policy teams at those very platforms are thinking about whether or not they should take the video down or label it depending upon their policy. UX teams are thinking about what that label looks like. And even human rights advocates might be thinking about the implications of such decisions in more explicitly authoritarian contexts. This not too far off example highlights the multidisciplinary reality of coping with manipulated media today, one that I'll suggest warrants deep collaboration between diverse stakeholders. So, by describing my work leading AI and media integrity efforts at the Partnership on AI, I'll highlight a few case studies that exemplify how to make trade-offs and think about cross-sector collaboration in this space. And in doing so, I'll depict the current landscape of manipulated media. Those lessons that I'll describe for stakeholder engagement surround how to engage stakeholders, how to bridge the technical and non-technical communities, how to navigate corporate complexity so as to affect platform behavior, and then how to field build in this realm. Starting with some background on PAI, we're a multi-stakeholder global nonprofit organization devoted to the responsible development and deployment of AI. And with over 100 partners from civil society, industry, academia around the world, questions of AI and media integrity are really ripe for pursuit from this perspective. And three areas we focused on over the past year surround manipulated media detection, tools that allow us to verify media and access to those tools, and then how to explain the results of manipulated media interventions and understanding to different audiences, making sense of them. So starting with a case on detection, our work at PAI and detection focused on the Deepfake Detection Challenge, a machine learning challenge created by Facebook to incentivize solutions, technical solutions that detect manipulated media. But while this is an ostensibly technical challenge, our multi-stakeholder AI and Media Integrity Steering Committee actually oversaw certain parts of that challenge, situating this question about detection in the realities of how malicious manipulated media spreads today. And a few insights from cultivating that stakeholder group and navigating the trade-offs in doing so. One, there will always exist trade-offs in larger, more diverse groups and smaller groups that can move more quickly and also meet with more increased frequency. So we went with 9 actors, about a third civil society, a third media, and a third industry in order to blend those disciplines while also allowing for continuity. Now, of course, we would have wanted greater experiential expertise, and while it's not a replacement for it, we were really intentional to have folks like Sam from Witness, who had on-the-ground experience in other regions in order to try and bring that perspective to bear on the committee. And of course, it's important to think about who you have from the platforms at the table. Now, we had 3 really seasoned ML engineers on the committee, and there were challenges inherent in understanding what intervention points in the governance process warrant different attention to different social dynamics. So what I mean by that is a lot of the technical folks thought of this as an inherently just a question of classification. Is the artifact perturbed in some way? Yes, no, and what's the statistical likelihood of that? But the others on the call understood that there were deep impacts, different societal impacts on different malicious media. So for example, maybe it's not the artifact, but it's the context around the artifact that actually we should be detecting. How do we bake that into this contest? Might we want to score the challenge in a certain way? Might we actually want to construct a data set that features more women because gender-oriented pornography is actually the real use case for deepfakes today. And this is just to show that there was a kind of push-pull, not just of thinking of this as socio-technical, but the actual intervention points in the technical challenge that allow us to do that. And very tactically, we had a lot of pre-read documents for the group. We had the group meet in person, ideally, to get to know each other. And there was this sense that they were part of a coherent field, but also a need to give each group what it needed to get up to speed. We had an intro to ML challenges for the journalists and misinformation experts that allowed them to then actually work more closely with the other folks. So actually having bespoke stakeholder attention doesn't create silos. It actually can allow them to come to the table in a more coherent way. And a few insights afforded by this type of multi-stakeholder engagement. One, detection, questioning whether or not it actually helps minimize the impact of the misleading, manipulated media we see today was an existential one that we faced. We also thought about how to make these examples and detection systems more explainable, grounded in real-world examples, to think about non-detection solutions, and ultimately, what informed case study 2, how to grant access to detection systems and other tools to others in the media verification landscape. And that was the focus of our second workshop series, that around media verification tools. Now, this was not just the steering committee. We had 40 representatives who were supposed to gather in person, but because of the COVID era, we actually had a 5-week, hour-and-a-half-long series. And this shockingly created more community through its continuity. So I'd suggest actually these kind of once weekly sessions that allow for more consistency and field building in structure design. It also allowed us to be more global because we were totally virtual. Really meaningfully, tech companies are not just kind of monoliths. And this structure allowed us to engage different tech company representatives depending on the session of focus. So maybe we wanted an AI engineer one week. Maybe we wanted a cybersecurity policy rep or misinfo policy rep the other week. Or maybe we even wanted a business lead who was thinking about resource allocation derived from this workshop. This structure allowed us to navigate and break down silos within platforms and have them even get to know each other while also interacting with the broader field. And to this end, we really wanted to ground the workshop in the realities of these different communities, and in doing so, emphasize this collective attention to media integrity that isn't contingent upon certain allegiances to different fields, but is derived from people's sense of contributing some piece of the puzzle to this issue area. And through this workshop, with all these perspectives, we questioned what would make manipulated media detection tools most useful. There was an emphasis on a need for a collective threat model and questions of who gets access and why, to better detection accuracy and scope, to build capacity and resources for global media organizations who are so integral to this work, and to think not only about content inauthenticity, but also authenticity through provenance interventions. And lastly, throughout all of this work, there was an emphasis on translating the results of detection and algorithmic output to a meaningful user interface, because ultimately it is humans making sense of manipulated media. And this is a key point. When we think of stakeholders, we don't just think of those in the partnership. We also think of users as stakeholders. And we've been conducting user research with this in mind. And meaningfully, there are different types of users. It's not just all people can be lumped together. We have to break down and understand affected and marginalized communities, aided by our civil society counterparts, in order to deeply understand the impact of malicious manipulated media. And further, different platforms have different needs. So it's vital for us through our research to talk to different platforms and recognize that while there may be consistent first principles in research, there are also nuances, whether you're on Reddit or whether you're on Twitter. And ultimately, the more richness you have in the partnership and the stakeholder context, the more global richness you have in case examples for manipulated media that allow you to pressure test and do user research on more creative examples that might help you find unintended consequences of interventions. So we've realized through our diverse stakeholders with case examples from a fact checker in Kenya or others around the world, we're better equipped to do more meaningful user research on manipulated media because we have more interesting case examples. So just a reminder on these themes and lessons throughout this work. One, in creating stakeholders and structures for engagement, you really need to explain who's there and why. We know you're not going to have 400 people at every convening and not be perfectly representative, but be really intentional and explicit about why you made certain trade-offs and what those were. And of course, consider different axes for inclusion. It's not as simple as technical versus not, even though I've made it out to seem that way. There might be different types of technologists, product managers versus engineers, and why do you have certain ones there and others not? Why are you prioritizing certain countries and others not? It's okay to not have everyone, but how do you do that in a meaningful way? Second, you can bridge the technical and non-technical while also paying attention to each group's unique needs. Providing each stakeholder group with the background they need actually helps bridge these groups. Emphasizing shared goals is important, but you also need to highlight times when each group has a unique lens to bring to the table. Thirdly, recognize that many individuals work on media integrity at platforms and don't even know each other. You are doing a service by identifying them and linking them up internally. The way to do this is to find internal champions with agency, influence, commitment, and time. And lastly, we are one ecosystem working towards manipulated media interventions. Emphasize common goals and that we're part of this one ecosystem. And at PAI, we're not just doing our work through our convenings themselves or citations produced from that work. We want to create easy methods for folks to interact with each other and incubate connections outside the formal multi-stakeholder context. So conferences like this are great, but how can we actually induce this type of community and field building more consistently? So ultimately, taking action on manipulated media requires diverse stakeholders, but it's not so simple. It also requires a lot of thought and intentionality. Thanks so much to my colleagues who worked with me on this project. And if you have questions or thoughts, we can be reached here. Thanks so much.